Thank you, Dan. So what you see before you is the first part of this memo. Our office felt the process portion, which has been extracted as the second part, was getting buried in the analysis portion, which is why these became two memos. So this big analysis piece is the product of some review of the existing zoning districts and some significant mapping, which has gone on, unfortunately, only in the last couple of days. So we've just barely gotten a real handle on this. But what we have to share with you should help you to help us figure out which sites to use as pilot sites when we are preparing new zoning. I'm going to walk you through this memo, and then I'm going to kind of summarize at the end again what we're hoping you can do with this material. What you have here right now, it starts with this introductory piece. There's not terribly much to that. And it moves right into a review of your existing zoning districts. So that piece is a somewhat limited review in the sense that it is looking principally at the question of whether the existing districts implement the kinds of mixed use and commercial center ideas that are in the plan today. So we've asked ourselves, in terms of this table that you're seeing, whether each of the town's current zoning districts that are used in center areas whether they allow for mixed uses, whether they have the kinds of standards that generate walkability, like pulling buildings up to the street, parking to the side or rear, streetscaping areas, wide sidewalks. And the final one is whether the district would allow a compact or dense form of development. And what you're seeing, this is the same key as last month's memo. So what you're seeing is the black dots are good and the clear dots are bad, and the others are sort of halfway in between. So you'll see that there's actually land area been used in the centers for low density residential purposes. Would one anticipate those to change over time? Perhaps, but it is a little bit exotic to have, especially suburban agriculture, little scattered pieces of that embedded there. You'll see that almost none of the districts, until you get to the TND district, really have the full spectrum of tools to make sure that we get compact mixed-use places with high-quality development standards. The closest today is the one sort of more frequently used, the GB district, which, as many of you know, is not exactly a perfect district for implementing mixed use, and has not really generated a whole lot of mixed use in the town. So each of these then are just little summaries of each of the sets of districts so that you can get our insights as to why we were saying what we said in that initial table. They talk you through the idea of the zoning district and whether it could successfully implement mixed-use places in the future. Following that is a description of some other pieces of today's zoning ordinance that really actually help you or hurt you on the mixed-use front. So there are some contextual standards, meaning standards which are measured in relation to the existing environment that you're in. So they're measured based on where your lot is. They're not a generic standard that applies necessarily everywhere. So the first one is a front setback averaging option. There is a height transition tool in the current rules, although it does substantially flatten out buildings and would require very significant building separation in the future between buildings. One real key is the alternative parking plan, which has allowed applicants to negotiate with staff to generate specific parking regulations for their properties. That's probably really been helping them. Then one of the final pieces that we noted here is that in a desire to preserve right-of-way, there is a setback measured from major roadways in the town. It is measured from the center line and ensures that no matter what the district that applies to that area is, you're going to get buildings set well back from the roadway. This may well need revisiting at the same time that we are relooking at some of the other questions about how these areas get zoned in the future. But you don't want the district on the one hand pulling the building up to the street and that standard pushing it back. The next piece includes a discussion of what we considered some of the key elements of what new zoning should do for these centers and mixed-use activity areas. And you can read these on your own. I'm not really going to go through them, but we covered the questions of use and of urban form. We covered some other elements in sort of a list fashion down here. The public realm, meaning the streets and the sidewalks, are covered, and then transitions to adjacent development, which are the best to use, which are the least effective to use. How the new zoning needs to be thought about in its implementation, especially with regard to phasing of development, a critical idea where you have redevelopment happening, but you have income being generated on the property already. How do you redevelop and keep that income coming while you're building a new building, for example? And then how to treat nonconformities. If we happen to change up the rules and people are no longer conforming, how are we going to make sure that in the future we are dealing with those effectively? The next piece of the memo, and this is really your significant homework here, is thinking about how to test the new code concepts. And next fall, we're going to run an exercise. It's further described in that part 2 memo that you have there, and I'll talk you through that one in a moment. But we're going to run an exercise where we're actually in town with some urban designers looking at specific sites throughout the community that provide us with a good test bed for understanding whether the kinds of rules we're anticipating really work in the Amherst environment. And we would do that through a variety of 3D modeling and 2D block studies, meaning drawings of building footprints and parking layouts to show that they actually fit into specific sites. So in thinking about the ranking of these sites, we want you to think about 3 key things. One is we are looking for sites where the disconnect between the current zoning and the future vision for the areas as defined in the comp plan is the most severe. Where the comp plan seems to be saying the right thing and the zoning is doing what the comp plan wants. For example, regional commercial implemented by the city's shopping center district, which is a regional commercial model for development. Maybe that's not the place we really want to work on. Maybe we want to work on a place that, one thing says is regional and everything that we understand about it says it's just a neighborhood area. And so we actually have some kind of disconnect. The second component of what we'd like you to think about, and I know that some of you have expertise in this area, is the likelihood of redevelopment. Part of that has to do with age of development, but part of it also has to do with quality of construction. You can have relatively new construction at sort of low cost that maybe is easier to replace than old construction that was done really well and probably should just be rehabilitated. So this whole question of the new zoning needs to generate new buildings sometime soon. So we want to look for those test bed areas to be areas where we can expect that the new zoning could spark activity. The final idea is really transferability. So a one-off location might be a bit problematic. There might be a special need for us to look at some specific area in town, but how much better would it be if we looked at areas that we could try the zoning out on 3 years later when we found we're quite comfortable with it, then go apply it to 7 or 10 other sites. That would be the most powerful kind of thing. So that the notion that the sites we recommend might be transferable in the future is probably important. We've recommended to you, but this is not the be-all and end-all. You're allowed to second guess on us on this. But we've recommended, we're looking for some types of sites, and we're not using that functional classification that the plan uses of regional, community, neighborhood. Rather, we're looking at some of these characteristics of specific areas. They might match up to that functional classification, but they might not. So one of the ideas is we should be testing some deep, large parcel areas where large footprint buildings go, because there isn't all that much of that in the town, and it will always be the best place to put large redevelopment options. Shallow corridor parcels. You have shallow corridors all over the town. So help us find, again, that one that would redevelop the most easily, that's ready to go if we would just pull the switch and get the zoning exactly right for it. Williamsville Edge. Certainly the discussion of the Hyatt in town recently has generated a need to talk about the edge parcels, especially between the freeway and the village of Williamsville. How should those be zoned? But both ends of Main Street have their own issues and may well be worth discussion. Then there are some of the traditional nodes. These are the traditional business areas, Eggertsville, Snyder, etc. Help us pick, again, the one where we could be the most effective if we got new zoning in place. And then a new suburban node. Some of those examples are, I've talked about here about Clearfield and Dodge and Hopkins Road. These are the centers which are going in a completely auto-oriented pattern in spite of the fact they're sort of intended to be neighborhood serving. So is there work we could be doing on one of those where there could be some infill or redevelopment? And finally, it seems as though, and this is again a topic for discussion because it's a little bit outside of our work scope, but it seems as though you have places which are dominated by office. And in those places, the market is likely to change over the next 10 years or so. We're seeing it change in other communities already. And we ought to be thinking about how can we surgically improve these office park areas so that they continue to be functional on into the future. So those are some things to kind of give you the concept of what you would be talking about here. I want to show you, I think we'll go up to full page view here, and I want to show you some of the other elements that we've attached here. So first is some work that was done by the town. This is the current version of a conceptual land use plan for the town, and you'll see it's annotated with a bunch of little numbers. Those are all little center numbers, and on the following 3 pages, you have a very nice table prepared by staff that gives you the name of the center, it gives you the kinds of building square footage that's there, the typical depths of the lots, the kinds of front setbacks you'll find. So a lot of meat about those areas, but probably especially important for those of you who may not spend all of your time looking all around town at commercial centers, is there's sort of the name of the center itself. There's also the name of some of the anchor businesses that might be located there, just to help orient you if you're having trouble with that issue. Then we put in a little bit of analysis done in our shop here. These are the same centers that you just saw. They have
Lee,
been a little... Excuse me a second.
Lee, can you blow that map up just a little bit as you're talking about it?
I sure can. So these are the centers. We'll just have a look here. This is the center range that is provided in the comprehensive plan: regional, community, neighborhood, traditional center. So all this is coloring those in so that you can start to see which centers are designated what. And if ever there were a time to second guess ourselves on these designations, it would be during the course of this exercise. So for example, this darkest red is regional. And here's a piece of land that's a designated center, happens to sit between Williamsville and the freeway. But you got to ask yourself, since it's freeway served like these, is it regional in character? And should we be thinking about this perhaps in a different way in that functional classification? That's one map. The next map is the mixed-use activity centers designated in the plan today: university-related, highway intersection, special use, urban village. So these are a variety of places around town. These ones, I believe, are accurately classified because they were specifically designated as these sort of mixed-use centers. But again, is there a different and better way that we could begin to classify these over time? And finally, we thought we might take the staff's map of height, take that maximum building height that we were seeing in the range, and apply it to the town. So this is height in stories. That's what the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is. So we have kind of grouped these together. So 1 and 2 are together, 3 and 4 are together, 5 and 6 are together, and then there's 10. Yes, you do have a 10-story building in town. So this is the map that shows you by the center where that height of buildings is. In fact, I was kind of fascinated by it because the large parcels here on Niagara Falls Boulevard and the large parcels on Transit Road do not necessarily have the height. The height is here near the interstate, no surprise there, and a little bit here. So, interesting question, you know, is height a component of this discussion that we should be talking about? I do want to say, while we're looking at this town-wide, it's probably important, and staff consistently reminds me, to remember that Amherst is part of a regional system of commerce here that includes the other side of Niagara Falls Boulevard, the other side in Clarence of Transit Road, and activity that lies, you know, outside the town's boundaries, including, you know, in downtown in Williamsville. And so don't forget to sort of think about Amherst's role in the region and whether it's going to continue to serve that role on into the future. Help us do some of that thinking about the comprehensive planning that gets us there. So then the only other piece that's in here is for each of those centers, and we've accumulated the centers from the staff's memo, we've prepared an aerial photo and a zoning map. And these are, they match each other. And what this will allow you to do is just get some sense when you're looking at things about what's going on, you know, what's in there, how big are those setbacks, how much green area is there, are there a bunch of little buildings, or are they all a bunch of big buildings? It just gives you a chance to orient yourself with the aerial photo and then be able to look directly down and see what the zoning was. Oh, motor services, okay. Oh, that was probably a bunch of gas stations in there, you know, or a, you know, lube joint or a muffler shop, whatever. So it's pretty easy to work with these. There's a whole set of these, and they run through the, I believe, 55 identified small areas that are in the staff's list. Ooh, 56, sorry. At the tail end of that, and I'll show you this whole page first, and then we'll go back and look at it smaller. At the tail end of that is a summary that goes with the maps above it, where each of these places is grouped. And I'm going to blow this up and try and turn it around for you. Each of these now, we have the center number, and then each of the zoning districts that make up that center. So the total center area, remember that we have accumulated a series of centers in some cases because they're all in one area. The staff has got those pulled out separately in that first information, the first big tables, but we've agglomerated it here. So you're seeing the total center area, you know, right here, center that includes 26 and 27 is one of the biggest, 350 acres of area in that one. But altogether, you're looking at about 2,400 acres of land in these centers. GB zoning is 1/3 of that total area. No real surprise there. I believe the next largest is shopping center. These are the regional centers, and office business, an equal amount of each of those. And then a substantial amount of multifamily, MFR 5. So this is just a way for you guys to have a little bit of detail about what's going on in each of these centers, so that you can have a good conversation between people who are quite familiar with it and people who are not really so familiar with it, about what size they are, what zoning has been applied, and then you can help us think about which should become the target areas for looking at in the fall charrette. So that's a great segue to the second memo, the little skinny one that you have there. So in the second memo, we're really just covering this process for how we would begin the preparation of the plan amendment and new zoning. So we've proposed to use a public participation design workshop. We're calling it here a charrette because that's just the term our firm uses. We can call it anything we want. Some people are offended by the term charrette, but for the moment at least, that's what we've called it. We've described each of the components of how the charrette might work. And then we've talked a little bit about how the material would be reviewed after that, including a tiny little bit of closing about how it goes through the official adoption process. But probably the most interesting piece for today, to get kind of a quick look at it, is this example that I've included from a charrette we're about to do starting in a couple of days. So you see that we would be up there for about a week. We show up on Friday. On Saturday morning, we hold a workshop with the general public, usually in a space that is near one of the centers that we're working on, and a space that is easily accessible to the public and highly visible if possible. Something like a storefront works really well. We then are working in our design studio for the remainder of the week, and ending with a work-in-progress presentation on that Wednesday night. However, a key part of this is feedback loops. And so this open design studio is open to the public, and we would be running technical meetings throughout those days. And those technical meetings would include people like the IDA and the rest of you who are in the room. They would include town staff. They might include town staff that are not involved there today, like people involved with streets or parks or other elements that we might be talking about. Might include talking to DOT, might include talking to the adjacent communities of Clarence and Tonawanda, for example. Those technical meetings help inform what you're seeing. By Monday night, we have taken the ideas from Saturday morning, and we're able to have a drop-in open house where people can just walk through the studio space. We'll have pinned up everything we're working on. We'll print everything out. We'll hang up all the tracing paper. We'll show all the drawings off. And we can walk people through sort of how these things work and where we see this going. The two lunch and learns, in this case, happen to be about historic districts and form-based codes. Ours could easily be a session on the ideas for the comprehensive plan and a session on the ideas for the form-based codes. They're usually done as brown bag lunches, again, in our space, just inviting the community in to share in the expertise of the group during those two experiences. So this is kind of what the Charrette Week looks like. Down below that, you'll see an example of what the backside of that page might look like, in which we kind of describe those to people and give people the addresses and the times and all of that. The reason that we show you this piece, and especially this early on, we do actually have charrette dates. I believe the Saturday is that the 23rd, Dan, of September?
Yeah, hang on a sec.
I'm looking too.
Yeah, I'm pulling my calendar up.
The Saturday is the 24th.
Saturday is the 24th. That's
so this would be the Saturday the 24th of September through the following Wednesday. We want all of you to begin to help us, help people understand how they can get engaged in this and how important it is to be talking with us about this and providing their insight. This is not a project in which the consultant team nor the town staff is really ready to tell you or the public at large how this all should pan out. In fact, we want to work our way there in a very transparent, open way that includes these kinds of public sessions, includes putting our material on the web as quickly as we can, includes taking in, everybody's insights. So we want you thinking about who needs to be blocking out these times in their schedule so that they can join us in the fall and help us with this. This is when we'll be working live with actual real places. And it will be some of the most interesting and most exciting time as part of this process. Many people feel the rules are kind of the dry ho-hum after that. So this is where all the visualization will occur. So with that, I wonder, Dan, is there anything you feel we missed covering?
I don't think so. Was there anything else you want to cover on the memo, or should we take some questions now? And this will kind of be the separation between the two parts that we can parse up for next week.
Yes. Actually, Dan, I thought I would be clever and stop the recording for a moment, and then we'll record the questions, and we can decide about them separately. All right. Are there any questions on either of the two memos or the material or how you might use them as you move forward?
I have a question. Lee, I have a question. This is Brian Andrzejewski. You made a comment about office centers transitioning in some other parts of the country. What are they transitioning to?
Well, so the biggest challenge is that they're emptying out. The solo office space is being traded in for the new creative office, most typically located in an area that is relatively vibrant, has walkable coffee shops and restaurants and things for people to spend their time in. Since their office cubicle has shrunk so far and they're all in shared spaces and whatever, they need great space to get outside to, etc. And actually many of them want to live nearby. And so you're starting to see residential components. You might see hotel for those businesses that actually have out-of-town guests coming into town. You'd see a lot more, in general, mixed use rather than the standalone office park, which is drive to, drive out at lunchtime, drive back in, drive back home at night.
Thank you.
Let me add a little bit to that, because many of you probably do not know this at this point, is that later on today we're going to be having a group getting together to evaluate some proposals to get a handle on just what we were talking about there and what's going on with the office component in town. The RFP really asked consultants to propose on two specific tasks. One was to update the information in the comprehensive plan, at least the economic information that's included in Chapter 5 of our background report, the inventory and analysis. So that's one component. The other one, which I think is most appropriate to this particular study, is want a consultant to take a look at or speak with the constituents in the town that are in the office business, the developers, landowners, and other office stakeholders, and find out exactly what's going on in the town of Amherst with office properties. And to take the downloading we get from that, and to find other communities that have similar problems and how they have dealt with those, how they successfully dealt with those, and to use that to develop some suggestions for policy amendments to the plan. And that will also be used as a way of taking a look at the code and say, what can we do in the code to create an opportunity for some redevelopment, reinvestment in the existing office space that we have now. That is not going to be a study which is going to take all year long. We're contemplating doing that in a matter of 2 months. And I'm going to toot Dave's horn here, but the AIDA is going to be financing part of that, and the town of Amherst is going to be financing part of that. We don't know at this point in time exactly what those costs are going to be, but we're going to find out real quickly. But that's something which hopefully, and we had a conversation with legal earlier, which at some point would be able to dovetail into the study we're doing now.
Any other questions or thoughts?
All right, just so I understand conceptually, because this is my first meeting. All right, we have a couple homework assignments to undertake from these materials, right?
You more than many other around this table, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, and what's the time frame by which we need to?
Okay, well, why don't you do everybody a favor and identify what you think are your signs?
All right. So.
And I think you can bifurcate that into this is for this particular study with Lee, and then later on we'll talk about the economic study.
We'll talk about the other one. One is to evaluate the different centers and whether they are labeled correctly with respect to the context of the surrounding built environment. Good. And then second would be to match that up, I think, the height map, and see if that's appropriate as well. Yes, no.
Lee, did you hear that?
Lee?
Yes, I
Still
did.
there, Lee?
Yes,
Okay.
I am. Sorry about that. Yes, I heard that. The challenge is that what you have described is the second guessing of the existing plan, and yes, that has to happen. But I guess I would extend it a little further. If you go back to the first memo that was prepared, there is a hint of perhaps a different way to categorize the centers. And I guess I'd like folks to kind of see whether trying that on, it would seem to fit better than the functional class model and mixed use activity center model that's been used to date. So it's a combination of all of that. But yes, he's right about that portion of the exercise.
All right, then I guess my third homework assignment would be to start thinking about potential sites to be used as models for the fall charrette, right? Okay.
Yeah, based on those guidelines. And
For me personally, when I looked at the report, and we've been through it a couple of times, is that particularly the piece that was put together by staff that we has integrated into the study is those areas, those centers are categorized by what I would call function, regional. What I intend to do is take a look at those, each one as functional groups, take a look at those and say, okay, which one is the poster child for some changes in plan policy and then related to that changes in the code. When we talked about this earlier, one of the things that I want to caution everybody about is that early on we became really concerned that there's certain areas of the town, certain commercial areas of the town that are auto-oriented. And from our perspective, they are always going to be auto-oriented. So we're not trying to change the universe of commercial development in the town, but we need to be able to target certain ones where we say there is potential here for more reinvestment and for some changes in land use, maybe some intensification. And from my point of view, those are the ones that I want to target as part of this study. But it's important to realize that there's going to be sections of town that there can be some tweaks to, that pretty much the foreseeable future are going to be auto-oriented and stay that way.
Does that change if the light rail line was not down Niagara Falls Boulevard?
Well, it certainly could.
That's how many years out?
So, yeah. We'll be doing this again before that happens.
Hey, Lee, just to go back a minute, you alluded to the first memo, and I just want to drill down on that a little bit. Were you referring to the framework for place types as the kind of the outline of
Yes.
characteristics that folks should think about?
Yes.
Okay, so those are on pages 7, 8, 9. It's in the first memo, so it might be the one. No, it's the one from the very first meeting, which you might have to. Yeah.
You received one.
It's a good question.
All right, we'll take care of that. But I mean, the idea here is to use those characteristics. And if I might just for a minute, we're talking about things like economic draw, transit access, the scale of the tenant spaces, urban form and walkability, building design, parcel depth, those and use. Those are the kinds of things that you think would be more useful as ways of typing the centers and the areas that we have designated for centers in commercial use, rather than the traditional kind of regional community, traditional neighborhood shopping center typology that we have now. Is that accurate?
I think so. I think we'll find that we cannot quite get the community functional system, the comprehensive plan functional system, to work in a way that we're comfortable with, that we'll be designating things regional because of their economic draw, but their modest scale footprints. Or we'll be designating something community because it's a large footprint grocery store in a small footprint area, and we wanted to call it neighborhood because it's right up against the neighborhood. So I think we're going to find enough challenges to the designation of the current pieces that we find ourselves wanting to enrich the system a little, and those are the elements that we've picked out for the moment, at least to start the conversation.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure you have it. I think we did send it to you. It was in the midst of all the fun.
That's are you coming? Are you out?
Yeah. Anybody else? Gary, Rick, Kelly, Mark, anything?
I just wanted to, I was just looking for this, the new zoning, you mentioned public realm, and one of the things that, page 10 of the first memo, that the town might want to consider is on-street parking as a mechanism to allow for increased density without sacrificing parking availability. It also oftentimes promotes walkability too.
We're all going to take field trips to Elmwood Avenue and see how that works. Well, we don't have an Elmwood Avenue here yet. So.
No, and the on-street parking is a way of creating the appearance of density and urbanity, for lack of a better term. Very, very sensitive topic out here.
Well, I think that gets back to the police comment about the staff's kind of protracted talking about the large areas of the town are going to remain auto-oriented. They are what they are. Yeah. We need to make sure that the zoning is up to current best practices, that the transitions are done better, just generally the zoning fits the context better. But those areas are going to be in heavily traveled corridors. They're large traffic generators in and of themselves, and they're probably not going to change over time. It's largely Amherst's role in the regional commercial economy. There are places in the town where we could do a better job with smaller scale, more neighborhood traditional scale commercial. And on-street parking is clearly a potential benefit to those areas. But but I think a good chunk of what we're going to be dealing with are areas that are going to be appreciably different in function than they are now. Maybe in form, but not in function.
Notwithstanding what Gary just said, I would hope that at the end of the study we may come up with some tweaks that would add some additional components, different elements, different functions to some of the auto-oriented corridors. But I think the staff all agrees that those areas are going to be auto-oriented. You're not going to make them into a linear village.
The one thing Lee mentioned in an earlier conversation is that we should be looking toward finding areas where we can create a new destination, walkable destination location, an activity center, particularly in an area where none exists now. That's something that's actually kind of exciting.
Any other questions for Lee, or I'm gonna let him go? I think. Lee, any final thoughts or comments or charges?
No, I think we're good. I'm looking forward to hearing what these folks think about some of this stuff after you guys meet next month.
Okay. All right. Thanks, man. I think
turning our
recording
off.